America has places that resist comfortable explanation, locations where the physical environment, the documented history, and the things people have reported experiencing there combine in ways that no single rational framework fully accounts for. Some of these places are officially explained. The explanations don't always satisfy. These are the 6 most disturbing, mysterious locations in America. Number 6, Skinwalker Ranch, Uinta County, Utah. Skinwalker Ranch is a 512-acre property in the Uinta Basin of northeastern Utah, approximately 12 miles from the small town of Roosevelt. It sits at the edge of the Uinta and Ouray Indian Reservation of the Ute Nation, whose oral traditions have long associated the land and the surrounding basin with a particular kind of dark spiritual entity, the Skinwalker, that can transform between human and animal forms. The Ute relationship with this territory predates Euro-American settlement by centuries, and their historical avoidance of the specific land that now constitutes Skinwalker Ranch is documented in ethnographic accounts going back to the 19th century. They did not use this land. They called it the Path of the Skinwalker. The modern chapter of the ranch's story begins in 1994, when the Gorman family, Sherman and Kathleen Gorman, and their 2 children, purchased the property from the previous owners, who had reportedly installed unusually heavy-gauge deadbolt locks on the interior doors of the main house before selling. The Gormans reported an immediate and escalating series of anomalous events from the first weeks of occupancy. Cattle mutilations in which animals were found with surgically precise wounds and no blood at the scene, poltergeist-type activity inside the ranch buildings, multiple UFO sightings over the property, and encounters with large animals that did not correspond to any identified species, and that behaved in ways inconsistent with known animal behavior. One reported incident involved a large wolf-like creature that reportedly could not be harmed by gunfire. Multiple rounds reportedly struck it without apparent effect before it retreated. Sherman Gorman, a practical farmer by background, reported these events not with relish, but with the specific distress of someone whose livelihood was being disrupted in ways he could not explain or prevent. The Gormans sold the property in 1996 to Robert Bigelow, the Las Vegas aerospace and real estate billionaire who founded the National Institute for Discovery Science specifically to study the ranch. Bigelow's organization placed scientific equipment throughout the property and stationed researchers there, generating an internal database of reported anomalous events over roughly 10 years. In 2016, Bigelow sold the ranch to Adamantium Real Estate, LLC, a company connected to Brandon Fugel, a Utah real estate developer. Fugel's ownership has been associated with the History Channel reality series that began in 2020, and that has presented ongoing investigation of the property. The scientific credibility of the ranch's documented anomalies depends heavily on who is doing the credibility assessment. The reported events, UAPs, unidentified aerial phenomena, cattle mutilations, poltergeist activity, orb sightings, apparent magnetic anomalies, are genuinely unusual. The skeptical position is that the combination of cultural expectation, observational bias, motivated reasoning, and the entertainment industry's financial interest in sustaining the mystery produces a feedback loop that amplifies ambiguous events into narrative-fitting evidence. The credulous position is that the volume, variety, and physical evidence of the reported events at Skinwalker Ranch constitutes a genuinely anomalous data set that the skeptical framework does not fully account for. Neither position is unreasonable given the available evidence. What is not ambiguous is that the Ute people have characterized this specific land as dangerous for a very long time, and that characterization predates every commercial incentive that currently surrounds the property. Number 5, Point Pleasant, West Virginia, the Mothman Territory. Point Pleasant is a small city of approximately 4,000 people at the confluence of the Ohio and Kanawha Rivers in Mason County, West Virginia. Between November 1966 and December 1967, it was the site of one of the most concentrated and most documented series of anomalous sightings in American history. A 13-month window that ended abruptly when the Silver Bridge collapsed on December 15, 1967, and sent 46 people into the Ohio River. The Mothman sightings began on November 15, 1966. 4 young people, Roger and Linda Scarberry, and Steve and Mary Mallett, were driving near the TNT area north of Point Pleasant late that evening when they reported seeing a large, gray, humanoid figure with enormous wings and bright red eyes standing near one of the old concrete ammunition igloos. The figure reportedly chased their car at speeds exceeding 100 miles per hour before they reached the city limits. The Scarberry-Millette report was filed with the Mason County Sheriff's Department that same night. Sheriff George Johnson confirmed to reporters the following morning that the witnesses appeared genuinely frightened and that their accounts were internally consistent. The story appeared in the Point Pleasant Register the next day under the headline, "Couples See Man-Sized Bird, Creature, Something." The TNT area, a World War II-era munitions production complex built in the 1940s and decommissioned after the war, provided an appropriately atmospheric backdrop for what followed. The site's abandoned infrastructure, including concrete ammunition, storage igloos, and the ruins of the TNT plant buildings, occupies approximately 2,500 acres of McClintock Wildlife Management Area. It was, and is, a genuinely unsettling place on its own terms. Over the following 13 months, approximately 100 additional sightings of the Mothman, or of a large winged creature that matched the original description to varying degrees, were reported in the Point Pleasant area. UFO sightings were also reported in elevated numbers during the same period, as were men in black encounters, individuals in black suits who visited witnesses and discouraged them from speaking publicly about their experiences. The journalist John Keel investigated the events extensively and personally interviewed many of the witnesses for his 1975 book, The Mothman Prophecies, which documented not only the sightings, but an associated pattern of anomalous telephone calls, interference-laden calls with strange voices and apparent foreknowledge, reported by witnesses and their contacts. The Silver Bridge collapse occurred at approximately 5:04 p.m. on December 15, 1967, during peak rush hour traffic. The bridge, which had carried traffic between Point Pleasant and Gallipolis, Ohio since 1928, failed when a single I-bar link in the suspension chain fractured due to a manufacturing defect and decades of stress corrosion cracking. 46 people died. 2 vehicles were never recovered from the Ohio River. The Mothman sightings, which had been occurring regularly for 13 months, stopped after the collapse. The NTSB investigation found no connection between the bridge failure and the paranormal events. The bridge was structurally compromised independent of anything that had been happening in Point Pleasant. Whether the timing of the sightings was meaningful or was retrospectively made meaningful by the collapse is a question that investigators have argued over for decades. Point Pleasant has leaned into the Mothman legacy with genuine civic enthusiasm. The Mothman Museum opened in 2005. A 12-foot stainless steel Mothman statue by sculptor Bob Roach has stood in downtown Point Pleasant since 2003. The annual Mothman Festival, which began in 2002, draws thousands of visitors each September. The TNT area is on the Mothman Festival's tour route. Number 4. Dudleytown, Connecticut, the village that walked away. Dudleytown is a ghost town in the township of Cornwall in Litchfield County, Connecticut, and it is among the more comprehensively mysterious abandoned settlements in New England, not because of any single documented horror, but because of the cumulative pattern of misfortune, departure, and institutional obscurity that surrounds it. The land is private property owned by the Dark Entry Forest Association, a private conservation organization that grants no public access and whose membership has historically been protective of the property's privacy to a degree that has itself attracted speculation. That protectiveness is not, on its face, sinister. Private conservation land is routinely closed to the public. But in the context of Dudleytown's accumulated legend, the closed gate reads as confirmation rather than administration. The settlement was established in the mid-18th century by colonial families, including the Dudleys, associated in local genealogical tradition with Edmund Dudley, an English nobleman executed for treason in 1510 under Henry VIII at the Tower of London. The Dudley curse that local legend traces to this execution has been variously described as a supernatural inheritance from Edmund Dudley's violent end, or as a more vague generational misfortune attached to the family name. In practice, what the historical record actually shows is that the settlement's residents experienced the kinds of illness, early death, and economic hardship that 18th and 19th century rural New England communities experienced broadly, which is to say, difficult and unforgiving. The specific cases that legend has attached to the curse, the madness of certain residents, the early deaths of others, are documented in local genealogical records, but the same records show comparable rates of misfortune in the surrounding Cornwall townships, where no curse has been proposed. The environmental reality of the Dudleytown site is, without any supernatural framing, genuinely inhospitable. The settlement occupies a depression in the Berkshire Hills, the Dark Entry Ravine, surrounded by ridges that intercept sunlight through much of the day. The land receives substantially less direct sunlight than the surrounding Cornwall area. The growing season in this shadowed depression was shorter, the soil rockier and less productive, and the isolation from the commercial corridors that were developing through the 18th and 19th centuries in the Connecticut River Valley meant that the economic options available to Dudleytown residents were limited. The abandonment of the settlement across the 19th century reflected rational agricultural and economic decision-making rather than supernatural pressure. What the environmental explanation does not fully account for is why, of the many similarly marginal New England settlements that were abandoned across the same period for the same rational reasons, Dudleytown specifically accumulated the density of legend and reported experience that it has. Marginal farmland is common in Litchfield County. The particular atmosphere of Dudleytown is not. What is documented, the settlement was gradually abandoned across the 19th century, with the last permanent residents departing in the early 20th century. The structures were either demolished or left to decay, and the forest has substantially reclaimed the former settlement. The stone walls that once bounded the Dudleytown fields, hand-stacked by colonial farmers over generations, are the most visible remaining evidence of the community. The Dark Entry Forest Association acquired the land in 1924 for conservation purposes and has maintained its privacy since. The specific disturbance that Dudleytown produces in the people who have encountered it, through the literature about it, through the accounts of those who entered without permission over the decades before enforcement became stricter, is atmospheric rather than evidential. The shadowed depression, the forest growing over the grid of stone walls and cellar holes, the prohibition on access, and the accumulated weight of the legend that has been attached to the land since the 19th century, combine to produce a location that is genuinely unsettling in a way that does not reduce easily to either the supernatural or the purely mundane. The most honest thing to say about Dudleytown is that it is a place where misfortune was real but ordinary, where the landscape is genuinely strange, where the legend has been amplified far beyond what the evidence supports, and where the combination of those three things produces something that is harder to dismiss than it should be. Number 3. Sedona's Vortex Sites, Arizona. Sedona, Arizona is a small city of approximately 10,000 permanent residents in Yavapai County, surrounded by red rock formations, buttes, mesas, and canyon walls of iron oxide-rich Permian and Triassic sandstone that glow in shades of orange, red, and pink across the light of the day. It is one of the most visually dramatic landscapes in the American Southwest, and one of the most visited, receiving approximately 3 million visitors annually. The formations themselves, names like Cathedral Rock, Bell Rock, and Courthouse Butte, carry a visual weight that operates independently of any spiritual framework, and first-time visitors consistently describe a landscape that feels designed, rather than geological, purposeful, rather than incidental. The specific claim that makes Sedona genuinely mysterious, rather than just scenically remarkable, is the existence of vortexes, specific locations in and around Sedona that are claimed by a substantial and economically significant community of practitioners, guides, and visitors to be sites of concentrated spiraling energy that affect human consciousness, facilitate spiritual experiences, and produce measurable physical effects on the landscape, including the twisted forms of juniper trees that grow at certain sites. The 4 primary vortex sites, Airport Mesa, Cathedral Rock, Bell Rock, and Boynton Canyon, are well mapped, well visited, and consistently described by the New Age community that has been organized around Sedona since the late 1970s as sites of genuinely anomalous energy. Each site is said to carry a distinct quality. Some practitioners characterize certain vortexes as masculine or active in their energy, and others as feminine or receptive, a distinction that echoes similar classification frameworks found in indigenous and folk traditions from cultures with no direct connection to one another. The vortex concept entered the Sedona mainstream through the work of psychic Paige Bryant, who in 1980 identified the specific vortex locations in Sedona through her own claimed psychic perception. The subsequent economic and cultural development of the vortex concept, the guided vortex tours, the crystal shops, the retreat centers, the healing practitioners, has made Sedona one of the most commercially developed New Age destinations in the world. The Tlaquepaque Arts and Crafts Village opened in 1973 before the vortex concept emerged. The vortex tourism infrastructure that characterizes modern Sedona developed primarily in the 1980s and has continued growing since. That commercial overlay is real and substantial, and it reasonably generates skepticism about how much of what people experience at the vortex sites is shaped by the expectation the industry has built around them. What makes the vortex sites genuinely interesting to a skeptic, and not just to believers, is the twisted juniper phenomenon. The juniper trees at certain Sedona locations do grow in unusually contorted spiral forms. This is visually apparent and is consistently photographed and cited as physical evidence of the vortex energy. The botanical explanation offered by the National Forest Service, which manages most of the vortex site land as part of the Coconino National Forest, is that the juniper contortion is produced by a combination of wind, the specific way juniper trees grow in rocky terrain, and differential growth rates caused by uneven soil nutrient distribution, not by any energy field. The NFS position has not prevented the twisted junipers from serving as the primary visual evidence for the vortex in the substantial literature that the New Age community has produced about Sedona. The genuinely difficult question about Sedona's vortexes is not whether electromagnetic energy fields measurably different from the surrounding landscape exists at those specific sites. Scientific measurement has not confirmed them. The difficult question is why so many people arriving at these specific sites with no shared framework independently report similar subjective experiences of heightened emotional perception, physical sensation, and psychological shift. Visitors who come as self-described skeptics with no prior investment in the vortex framework have recorded accounts indistinguishable from those of committed believers. The same tingling in the extremities, the same sudden emotional release, the same sense of expanded or altered perception that retreats when they leave the immediate area of the site. The national forest land at the vortex sites is genuinely beautiful and genuinely unusual in its geology and light quality. Whether that is sufficient explanation for what people consistently report, there is a question that the available measurement tools are not designed to settle definitively. Number 2. Bridgewater Triangle, southeastern Massachusetts. The Bridgewater Triangle is a roughly triangular geographic area in southeastern Massachusetts covering approximately 200 square miles, with its 3 points at Abington in Plymouth County, Freetown in Bristol County, and Rehoboth in Bristol County. Within this area, paranormal researchers, journalists, and local historians have documented over decades an unusual concentration of reported anomalous events. UFO sightings, poltergeist activity, Bigfoot encounters, cattle mutilations, and documented criminal cult activity that moves the triangle from purely paranormal territory into something with a darker, more verified history. The Hockomock Swamp, approximately 17,000 acres of freshwater wetland extending through Bristol and Plymouth counties, sits at the triangle's center and has been its defining geographic feature in both the indigenous cultural context and the contemporary paranormal research context. Its name derives from the Wampanoag language and has been translated as the place where spirits dwell, or the Devil's Swamp, depending on the source and the translation approach. The Wampanoag people's characterization of this specific wetland as spiritually significant, a place of power and danger, predates European colonization of the region by centuries, and was noted by colonial observers who encountered the Wampanoag framework without necessarily sharing it. Notably, the swamp is among the largest intact freshwater wetland systems remaining in New England. 17,000 acres of dark water, sedge marsh, and Atlantic white cedar that has been ecologically continuous for thousands of years, and that the surrounding development has not meaningfully penetrated. The documented human history of the Hockomock Swamp and the Bridgewater area includes the King Philip's War of 1675 to 1676, in which the Wampanoag leader Metacom, called King Philip by the English colonists, organized a confederation of indigenous peoples against the colonial expansion that was systematically displacing them. The war ended in August 1676 with Metacom's death and the near-total destruction of the Wampanoag people as a political entity. The Hockomock Swamp had served as a refuge and tactical terrain during the war. Whether the land holds anything of that history in any sense beyond the geological and ecological is a question each visitor answers according to their own framework. The contemporary disturbing history of the Triangle is documented rather than alleged. The Freetown State Forest, which occupies the southern portion of the Triangle, became the site of documented criminal activity in the 1970s and 1980s. The 1978 murder of 15-year-old Mary Lou Arruda, whose killer Carl Drew was prosecuted and convicted of the murder with a life sentence, with the prosecution and local law enforcement documenting connections to a satanic cult operating in the area, placed the Freetown Forest at the center of a criminal investigation that was real, prosecuted, and resulted in multiple convictions. Freetown State Forest was not just a scene of alleged paranormal activity. It was a crime scene with documented perpetrators. Subsequent years brought additional reports from Freetown State Forest of animal sacrifice, ritual staging, and cult gatherings, some of which were documented in police reports and investigated by the Bristol County District Attorney's Office. The forest did not shed its association with organized criminal activity simply because the highest profile case was resolved. The journalist and author Joseph Citro, who coined the term Bridgewater Triangle in his writing, and who has spent decades documenting New England's paranormal geography, has consistently emphasized that the Triangle's history is not reducible to either sensationalism or easy rationalization. The documented concentration of reports over a defined geographic area, beginning with indigenous characterizations and continuing through the colonial period, the King Philip's War period, and the modern era, represents an unusual continuity of unusual experience in a specific location. Whether the Hockomock Swamp is anomalous because it is genuinely anomalous, or because it is large, dark, ecologically powerful, and surrounded by a deep history of human tragedy that gives it an atmospheric weight that amplifies perception, the swamp itself does not clarify. It is approximately 17,000 acres of flat, quiet, dark wetland in a state that has largely built itself over and around its own wild places. Walking into it feels like stepping into something older and less managed than the surroundings suggest is possible. Number 1. The Zone of Silence, Chihuahuan Desert, Mexico, and the American border. The Zone of Silence, the Zona del Silencio in Spanish, is a semi-arid patch of desert in the Bolsón de Mapimí in Durango, Mexico, near the Chihuahuan Desert that extends across the border into West Texas and New Mexico. It sits between the 26th and 28th parallels, in a region that also contains, on the same latitude, the Bermuda Triangle in the Atlantic and the Egyptian pyramids at Giza. This geographic alignment has been cited by researchers interested in what they characterize as energy zones around the Earth, and while it is accurate as a cartographic observation, its significance is more interpretive than empirical. The Zone of Silence entered international attention when an Athena rocket launched from the White Sands Missile Range in New Mexico on July 11, 1970, went off course and came down in the Mapimi Desert rather than at its intended target range. The U.S. Army recovered the missile. It had not carried a nuclear warhead, with the assistance of Mexican authorities, and the recovery operation was notable for reports from Army personnel of difficult maintaining radio contact within the specific zone where the missile landed. The frequency interference observed during the recovery, combined with the area's remoteness and the apparent coincidence of the missile impact location, generated ongoing interest in what made that specific area anomalous. The zone had, in fact, attracted attention before the 1970 incident. A second Athena rocket had come down in the same general area in 1966, and aviators had reported compass irregularities over the Mapimi Basin going back decades earlier, details that received less attention than the dramatic 1970 Army recovery operation, but that predate the commercial and journalistic interests that followed it. Subsequent investigations by Mexican scientists and by the Mapimi Biosphere Reserve, which was established in 1977 and includes much of the zone of silence within its boundaries, found geological features that may explain some of the reported electromagnetic anomalies. The region contains significant deposits of magnetite and other iron-bearing minerals in the surface geology, which can affect radio frequency transmission and reception in localized ways. The specific desert plant communities of the Bolson de Mapimi are unusual. The Biosphere Reserve has documented endemic plant species found nowhere else, and the area's paleontological record includes significant fossil deposits, including marine reptile fossils from the Mesozoic era. The meteorite density in the zone of silence is notably higher than surrounding areas. An unusual concentration of iron-rich meteorite material on the surface and in shallow subsurface deposits that has attracted scientific attention independently of the paranormal claims. Some researchers have connected the meteorite concentration to the magnetite deposits and to the radio interference phenomenon, suggesting that the geological and mineralogical character of the specific basin explains the anomalies without requiring any mechanism outside conventional physics. What makes the zone of silence border-related is that the geological and geomagnetic characteristics of the Chihuahuan Desert Basin do not stop at the international boundary. The same Bolson de Mapimi formation extends into West Texas and southern New Mexico. The anomalies documented in the Mexican portion of the basin have no particular reason to be unique to that side of the line. The military presence in the surrounding American territory, White Sands, Holloman Air Force Base, the various restricted ranges in the Chihuahuan Desert of New Mexico, and the classified activity documented to occur in that region creates a specific context in which it is difficult to assess which anomalous reports from the American border zone are genuine phenomena, and which are activities being conducted on land whose classification specifically prohibits their acknowledgement. The zone of silence in this reading functions not only as a natural anomaly, but as a kind of perceptual screen, a location where the genuinely strange and the deliberately concealed occupy the same geographic space, making each harder to distinguish from the other. As Mexican scientist Santiago Garcia, who has conducted research in the zone of silence, noted about the area's unusual characteristics. The desert does not lie. What you measure, you measure. The difficulty is knowing what you have measured and why the result is what it is. The zone of silence offers the specific epistemological problem of a place where the anomalous observations are genuine, but the explanations remain genuinely contested between the scientific and the paranormal frameworks, with neither side having made a claim that the other side cannot raise serious questions about. 6 locations, 1 indigenous sacred territory with a modern commercial overlay, 1 grieving river town with an unexplained interlude before a bridge fell, 1 abandoned New England settlement in a shadow, 1 desert tourist destination whose geology generates experiences that repeat without explanation, 1 Massachusetts wetland with a name that translates to spirit dwelling, and 1 desert basin where rockets go off course and radio goes quiet. Each resists comfortable single explanation resolution. Each has been the subject of enough documentation to confirm the specific experiences people have at them, and not quite enough to fully explain why. These are the 6 most disturbing mysterious locations in America, and the mystery in every case is still open. Hit that like button and subscribe. More content like this coming.